Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll get started in just about 30 seconds. I'm going to give everyone a chance to jump on and get their audio settled. Hello, everyone. Looks like we have some folks joining. We are going to get started in just about 15 seconds. All right, we are going to get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Indiana Youth Institute's February webinar titled Unveiling the Power of Year-Round Black History for Youth. My name is Joshua Long. I'm the Senior Educational Content Manager here at IYI. We thank you for joining us for today's presentation, and we are always grateful to have the chance to connect as a community of Indiana youth workers who remain committed to meeting the needs of our youth and children. For those who are not familiar with IYI, our mission is to improve the lives of all Indiana children by strengthening and connecting the people, organizations, and communities that are focused on kids and youth. Listed here, you can see our vision that drives the work we do for Indiana youth, as well as our mission. And before we begin, I'm just going to share about 15 seconds of pointers that'll help you engage with today's webinar. For any technical support issues, use the chat feature to send a message, and Aaron Whitcomb, IYI's registration manager, is behind the scenes to assist you. You will use this feature to converse with the group as well. And one little tip, make sure after it says to that you are sending a message to everyone. And so as we are logged on right now and getting logged on, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves, our name and the organization that we're with, and be sure to send that to everyone. We also encourage you to ask questions, so please use the Q&A feature for any you may have, and we will get to as many as possible. Later today, you will receive an email with the link to complete an evaluation of the webinar. Please take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts about today's presentation. And if you don't receive the evaluation email, check your junk email as it may have been directed there. Once you complete the evaluation, you will be redirected to your certificate of participation. Like all of IYI's webinars, today's webinar will be posted on our website if you'd like to revisit a portion later or share the opportunity to listen in with partners. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Shanta S. Barnes, also known as Educator Barnes, is a married mother of identical twin boys. She navigates education from both the educators' and parents' perspectives. She has been an educator for nearly two decades and has worked with K-12 schools, universities, and education-adjacent organizations through her educational consulting business, Blazing Brilliance. She has just extensive experience in the education world, and we are so excited that she's joining us here today. And so I'm going to turn it over to Shanta S. Barnes.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Josh. I just want everyone to know it's Shantae, long A, and most people know me as Educator Barnes. So if you ever see me out in public, you can say Shantae Barnes, Dr. Barnes, or Educator Barnes. All of those names are perfectly acceptable. And one of the topics I love talking about is Black history, history period, because I just love history. Anytime I do presentations, whether they're online or in person, I keep a running agenda on the side because that helps everyone know where we are in the presentation. So if you look at the screen right now, you'll see where we are going during this lunch and learn. So our goal at the end of this session is that you will have some tools that you can use and some tips that you can use to infuse Black history throughout the year as a youth worker. A little bit about me. I know Josh told you all a little bit about me, but I wanted to go into some of my particular areas. I wear a lot of hats, but the most important hat that I wear is mom. I do have twin boys, and not only from the educator perspective do I want to learn Black history, but I also want my own children to be in spaces where they're learning Black history. So I've been an educator for a while. I currently teach at IUPUI and Marian University. I teach a whole host of education courses. I'm the editor-in-chief of Indie Kids Winning. I have a publishing company with my husband, and then I do my consulting through Blazing Brilliance. When it comes to in the classroom. I've been an English teacher for most of my career, teaching middle school English. I love middle schoolers. They are my favorite age group to work with. So if you're on this call and you work with the middle school people, yay you, because they are my favorite people like ever on earth. And I hope when I retire, I'm doing something where I'm back directly working with that particular group of youth. But I've done some work with multilingual learners, literacy coaching, being a school librarian, and all of those different buckets and avenues all come together with the work that I do across the city. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about these pictures that I actually have here. This picture right here, this was 2019. I took a whole grade, so I was a school administrator at the time. I took a whole grade of fifth graders, and we went to the Indiana State Museum, and it was for it was a Native American Heritage Day. And while we were there, we were all learners. We all had limited background knowledge of the different indigenous people who are alive and present and are here in Indianapolis. And we were all learners. And sometimes when we are not children anymore, we have some shame about like we didn't know something. And so I told the students, like, I'm learning just like you are. And I say all that to say that if there's something I said in this presentation, you're like, oh, I wish I had known that. Don't beat yourself up about it, because we all should be learners like throughout our whole entire life. And then the same thing with these two pictures here. I was sharing information with students that they didn't know, and they were just like, oh, that's cool, Mrs. Barnes. So just keep your mind open, just like a child's mind, to say, hey, it's okay that I don't know what I don't know. So anytime I have a presentation, I always like to set the mind, our mindset. And I pulled this quote from this book, and this book is super tiny, and I'm so disappointed it's no longer in print. I cannot remember where I got this book from. I probably got it from a museum, and Mr. Barnes, my husband, claims I always say I don't remember where I get my books from because I love to buy books all the time, but I legit do not remember where I bought this book. But this quote is actually from this book. It says, find the good is all around you, find it, showcase it, and you'll start believing in it. And when we're working with our youth, sometimes their brains are still developing, and sometimes it can be difficult. And so taking this intentional time to learn different historical facts or learn about different people, and you can use that information to connect to students, that helps you find that good. It helps you build those great relationships with our students. So that is our mindset focus for this presentation today. So I want to tell you a little story. So story time about this series I created a few years ago. So I believe the year was 2021. I can't believe it's been 3 years, but that would be exactly right. So my twin boys, they were in third grade when the pandemic happened. Next year, we live in Washington Township. You could keep your kids online virtually. So we kept our kids online virtually all of fourth grade. We were super excited that school year. That was the first school year that my sons had a Black teacher, and they were in the same classroom. There is no perfect formula for identical twins. So if you're a parent of multiples out there, every year we made up a new plan. So kindergarten, separate classrooms, first grade, separate classrooms, second grade, we're together, third grade, we're apart, fourth and fifth grade, we're together. And now in middle school, it's like half and half. But they were together in fourth grade. If you know anything about history in Indiana, in the fourth grade history standards, kids are taught about Indiana history. So that's what they do in social studies. So they learn about how Indiana becomes a state. They learn about the territory, the building of the canal, why we're called the crossroads of Indiana. And typically you do this famous Hoosier Project. I lived in Indianapolis since I was 3. So when I was in fourth grade in Lawrence Township, I did this exact same project. So I was super excited. My one son, he picked Orville Redenbacher, and then my other son, I can't remember the guy's name, did something with heat. And my sons gave me the list. And when I looked at this list, there was about 40 Hoosiers on this list, and 30 of the Hoosiers were white men. And then the last 10 Hoosiers, there were some females in it, but there were very few Hoosiers who were of any diverse backgrounds. And so I wrote to their teacher, and not in like a negative way. I said, hey, I said, this list looks very familiar. It looks like the same list that I had when I was in 4th grade back in the 90s. And now we're in the 2000s and we're still using the same list. And so she went on to share that this was just a list that they had inherited. And she said she never really even questioned the list. So from there, I always say, if you see an issue, don't just complain about the problem, be part of the solution. So I said, well, I'll take some time and pull together a list. So that turned into me writing an article for Indie Kids Winning about local Black history, starting local and learning about the history all around you. And Washington Township, actually, one of the administrators on the district level actually shared the article with people across the school district, which I was shocked. I was shocked about and humbled about, but I also provided resources. So fast forward from there, for Keep Indiana Learning, I ended up doing a series for them where I did a spotlight on 30 different Black Hoosiers in Indiana, and just some of their excellent things that they did. And I did it a tie to Indiana, because there are some people that did some great work here, but they weren't technically born here, but they lived here for most of their lives and they passed away here. So you're a Hoosier through and through. So that's how this series came together. But sometimes you start to question, why don't I know these things? And sometimes we don't know things because we weren't taught things. So I loved going to school in Lawrence Township. I don't believe I had a bad education in Lawrence Township, but I couldn't even come up with a list for my own sons without doing research because I wasn't exposed to it. So that's how I ended up doing this Black Excellence series. And then I just kind of kept doing it. So even right now in 2024, I'm actually like right as we speak, working on a series around Black educators in Indianapolis right now. So I've done, I think, 8 or 9 videos so far, and all of them were not posted because I'm posting like one a day. But it's just been really cool for me as an educator to learn about all of the different educators in Indianapolis, because I went to Purdue and I remember taking this class. So in my cohort, I was the only Black person in my English education cohort. And I remember we read a book, and the whole book was about white teachers learning how to be around Black children. And it never really connected to me. So me doing this project right now for just public consumption, I'm learning about people who look like me, who had done a lot of things. And that kind of has fueled my fire to continue to be an educator, because I have been an educator for nearly 20 years and I love what I do, but sometimes you're like, man. And so then going back into history and reading about people, that has energized me. So one of the questions that a lot of people ask when you talk about starting with local history, and later in this presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you go about doing that, and how you connect it over to the work that you all are doing, because I see in the chat that we have a whole host of people from various backgrounds. Sometimes people ask the question of, well, should we like just ignore like nationally known figures such as Dr. King and Rosa Parks? And I thought the best way to answer this question was to share this short video. This video is about 3 minutes from Harvard professor Sun Michaud. He's an academic, he's an activist, and he is an artist. But most importantly, he is a social linguist. And so he makes videos almost daily where he talks about language, and he intersects that with social cultural issues. And this video, he made this video probably, I believe, at the end of January, like right before this month started. And he addresses what we should do and how we should think about like the national figures when we're also thinking about local figures as well. So I'm gonna hit this video. If the sound does not play, please let me know, but I think I did everything correctly.
As an educator, I am all for Black History Month being used as an opportunity to highlight Black achievements and Black achievers. And I generally support people who support that effort. So then why does this video annoy me?
For my teachers out there that would like to get something for African American History Month, hoping that you're trying to look a little bit more outside the box and not just do Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and so forth. I'd like us to kind of get out of that of just trotting out sort of the same people.
Is it because a white person is referring to Black History Month as African American History Month? Well, Or is it because a white person has decided to make themselves the decider which Black historical figures are worthy of being presented? Well, I understand that there are white educators of Black children who are tasked with doing exactly that. What annoys me is the premise that we already know everything we need to know about Rosa Parks and MLK Jr. What educators, especially non-Black educators, do you really know what you think you and your students already know? Whenever I post Did You Know content or have conversations about Rosa Parks and MLK Jr., most of the time, the people who thought they knew everything they needed to know did not know. Did you know that Rosa Parks was actually about that life? She didn't not give up her seat because she was tired. She was consciously engaging in activism. As an activist, she was more militant than her counterpart, and her personal hero was Malcolm, not Martin. In fact, years later, she would even speak at the Nation of Islam's Million Man March under Minister Louis Farrakhan. How many people know that Martin Luther King Jr. was originally named Michael Luther King Jr., and his name was changed along with his father's at 5 years old to Martin, in honor of the German reformists? Or that Martin was such a brilliant student that he skipped 9th and 12th grade and entered Morehouse College at 15 years old? And I presume that the so forth includes Harriet Tubman. But did you know that the first woman to lead a U.S. military operation was Harriet Tubman, who was also a nurse and a spy for the Union Army? And along with 150 Black Union soldiers under her command, Harriet the Spy, the U.S. militia leader, set free by force over 700 enslaved people. Or that George Washington Carver didn't discover the peanut. He was a highly revered scientist who advised presidents, captains of industry, even Gandhi himself. Edison tried to secure George Washington Carver's service for $100,000 in 1 year. By today's rate, that would be nearly $3.6 million. George Washington Carver refused because he thought that his time would be better spent at Tuskegee. His brilliant mind helped to save this nation's agricultural industry. So before you commit to the idea, we know everything we need to know about Rosa, Martin, Harriet, and George, ask yourself, who taught you what you think you know? The history of these Black icons has been generalized, sanitized, whitewashed for mass consumption. You don't know what you think you know. Not enough to just dismiss them as not being enough outside the box. But the question is, whose box? Why were they boxed in the first place? Educators, y'all got about 2 weeks to get your Black History Month lesson plans together, or you can just do it today, because every month is Black History Month. We out here.
I really love that video because it's just a simple message to say that even if you learned anything about the icons that are in that video, there's only so much time in your school curriculum. So there's going to be things that you don't know. So the Out of Jordan Museum on MLK Day this year, they showed a documentary called King in Chicago. And if you haven't seen that documentary, check it out. I actually took my sons with me to go view this documentary. And it was about Martin Luther King and his family moving into Chicago and living there for a while, and some of the work they did in Chicago. And we're 3 hours away, Indianapolis. I had never heard of any of this ever before. So even though I considered myself to be thoroughly knowledgeable on Dr. King, because I was an English teacher, which means we did read Dr. King's speeches and analyze how he constructed his argument and how he built his speech. I had no clue about the work that he did. And then a few years back before that, there was someone, and I can't recall this person's name, who was associated with the nonviolence movement, who came to a church it was like a church event. So it was like MLK Day about 10 years ago. And they actually explained what the nonviolent movement was about and the actual training that adults and kids got. So even though like you hear about the nonviolent movement and you hear about like the sit-ins, they actually talked about the training that they gave people and how it's more than just not responding, is also with how you respond with your mouth and like the actual actions and policies you put into place, and that whatever movement that you try to do in society to make society better, no one should get harmed in the process. And in the King in Chicago documentary that was shown at the Out of George, they interviewed people who are still living who were part of the movement. And some of them talked about how incredibly hard that was for them to get on board with that, because it was a huge mindset shift. And so I always tell people, regardless of what work you're trying to do, whether you're trying to connect with the students and children that you're working with, just start somewhere. You can start with stuff you've already been exposed to and go a little bit deeper, or you can say, hey, I'm just going to just pick something and start there. So I always think it's really important that even when we're emphasizing local history, there's nothing wrong with going back and learning more about bigger icons that we feel that we know a lot about. Because most of the time when I ask people, have you ever read a Dr. King speech that wasn't I Have a Dream speech? Most people say no. And so if you haven't, I encourage you to read some of his other speeches, because he talks about a whole host of areas. And if you have any questions at any time while I'm speaking, I went to a predominantly Black Baptist church as a kid, so I'm very much to like speak back to me. So if you have a question at any time, feel free to ask in the chat. So this slide right now, I want you to take a minute to look at these people that are on this slide. These are the 30 people that I featured in the Black Excellence series I did. So I would love for you to take a moment right now, look at these names, and if you're comfortable, put into the chat how many of these people that you know something about. So let's take about couple minutes to look at these names and see who you know something about, and then put the number that you came up with in the chat. And when I was working, as you guys are looking at this and putting your number in the chat, as I was working on this presentation, myself, honestly, there were only about 5 or 6 people on here that I knew enough knowledge about that I could have written the information without doing any research. So even for myself, a person who's lived here since I was 3, minus the years I was at Purdue, I didn't know what I didn't know. And for example, Shirley Graham Du Bois, who is the wife of W.E.B. Du Bois, I did not know that she had ties to the Hoosier State. I didn't know that at all. And that she was a music composer and a writer. So I had the opportunity to learn a lot about different people that you didn't even know. Or Emma Christie Baker, who was a female police officer, which at that time period, most of the people that were doing that type of work were males. So even with that, the gender norms being kind of expanded as well. So, and then Charlie Wiggins was probably one that stood out to me when I was doing this particular work, because before the race in IndyCar, all that was integrated, you had the Gold and Glory sweepstakes, where Black race car drivers were racing at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. And I found his story so captivating, because he had all of these things that happened to him, with him working since he was like 10 years old, to him, you know, racing, to losing part of his leg, losing part of his eye, becoming a mechanic, teaching other people how to race. And so every one of these stories are something that's motivational. And so you're probably wondering, okay, this is great, but how do I actually take all of this information and connect it back to the work that I do? Depending on the field that you're in, I would suggest trying to find people to learn about that connects to your field. So there's one organization I do work with that they do work with like kids and environment. So I recommended this book to them. This is the Intersectional Environmentalist by Leah Thomas. This book isn't just focused on Black people, but there's a significant amount of information about Black people. And it talks about environmental issues in different Black communities, how those environmental issues happens. And so having this knowledge, sharing that knowledge with students that you're working with, and then allowing that to become an organic thing where you're now working on something based on knowledge that you have gained and been able to connect, has been helpful. And one organization in particular that turned into, well, we should plant some in our neighborhood. Like, there's not a lot of bees and we're trying to grow food. And I'm a gardener, so I grow things. And we don't have enough pollinators. So we should actually like grow some plants. And so that actually became this organic thing that started because the youth worker took the time to learn something about environmental history and brought that back to the work that they were doing. There was another organization that took actually people from this presentation, and they used this to do projects. So one group, they took Major Taylor and they wanted to do something around being healthy and riding your bike. And so that turned into them doing a fundraiser, doing a bike race, taking that money and donating it, and then researching some guidance around being healthy and how adding cycling to your life is fun way to be healthy and also get away from your video screens. And that is like from the kids, because that's what the kids said, that we need to put our video controllers down and get outside. So when you're thinking about learning history, you're thinking about learning information that you don't know and then connecting it to the work that you are doing. And after this presentation is over, you should be able to get a copy of my slide deck. And so I linked in all of the profiles and my slide deck. In my slide deck, there are actually activities that go with each person. So if those activities are applicable to the work that you're doing, feel free to use those activities. I know these activities have been used by students across the state. They're being used a lot during this month because I keep getting like questions from students and teachers, which has been absolutely great. And also, this is not all inclusive. This is only just part of the history in our state. And I'm a Black person and I'm still actively learning my history. And that's the other thing I would, if I would pause and add something, that sometimes I was having a conversation with a person who was white. And that person was saying to me, I asked this Black person about this history, and the person said that they didn't know. And I just felt like they weren't being honest. I don't think they wanted to help me. And I said, well, sometimes like we don't know, because we went to the same schools that you went to. Like we don't have this information. And so many times a lot of the content creators who are creating Black history information, they are, and happen to also be Black, they are learning this information to create the information. So just don't assume if someone does say that they don't know, that they're just saying that to be mean. They just may not know. They may be learning just like you are. So if you want to purchase a book, and I'm an English teacher, so I have all the books that I will be telling you about today. I love this book right here, African Americans in Indianapolis, the story of a people determined to be free. This book was written by David Leander Williams, and I met him. He and I, along with a couple of other people who do a lot of work with Black history in our state, we were on a panel together for the Indiana Housing Conference. And when I met him, he said, hey, I'm about to publish this book. I think you'll like this book. And he actually sent me this book. So on top of that, I got a book for free, so that was super awesome. But I have absolutely loved this book because he says in the beginning of the book, and I'll show you this in the video, he talks about that he created this book because his I believe niece was trying to learn some history and they just couldn't find any. So that's the other difficulty. Sometimes it's hard to find it. So we're gonna watch this quick video book with video clip with the author of this book, African Americans in Indianapolis, why he decided to write this book, and hopefully this will encourage you if you want to start your Black history learning journey, that this may be one book that you would like to start with.
Well, there is a saying, the pen is truly mightier than the sword.
And as we embark on Black History Month, a native Hoosier and scholar is hoping his latest book can inspire young people.
In it, he tells the stories of legacies, the history of notable African Americans who have yet to be celebrated in the ways they should. A native Hoosier who grew up in a public housing development on Indy's west side, David Leander Williams believes his recently released book, African Americans in Indianapolis, fills a void.
My niece came into my computer room.
He remembers the conversation with her that would be his call to action.
Uncle D, I have a project. I have to write about outstanding African American individuals or events that occurred during the 20th century. I took it by the hand and I took it down to Central Library. And I stood there we were there for about an hour looking for books that comprehensively talked about the history of African Americans in Indianapolis.
But David says there was hardly anything.
I became angry and I said, somebody should do something about this.
That somebody would be David himself.
I had to do it.
David spent years researching, compiling stories of Black people in Indianapolis history. He takes the reader back to the days when Indiana was part of the Northwest Territory and a loophole that allowed some families to own slaves, profiling the cases of Polly Strong and Mary Bateman Clark, slaves in the territory who fought for their freedom.
Also, the establishment of the Bethel AME Church,
a place that provided sanctuary and spiritual support to escaped slaves and freed Blacks who ventured north. We hear about Henry Hart, a talented musician who played for a president and Indiana's governors. David highlights the doors opened by Indianapolis's Madam C.J. Walker, the first African-American woman self-made millionaire.
Here she was, a poor African-American lady, from the fields in her southern state, who's able to overcome adversity.
In his book, David even talks about the historical significance of his alma mater, Crispus Attucks High School.
The gentleman by the name of David Curtis Stevenson came to town. He was he later became very, very prominent in with the Ku Klux Klan. He had very, very powerful influence in local, city, state government. So he's able to convince the city fathers to create a high school specifically for African Americans. He wanted to create a high school that was doomed to fail.
But the first principal would not let that happen.
Dr. Matthias Norcox, he was able to go around the country and hire the most outstanding scholars in the country, many of whom had master's and PhD degrees, but who could not teach in white high schools and colleges because of racism. So what he did, he brought college professors to the high school. So our education was not inferior, it was superior.
The book underscores the key players who founded and cultivated the area that became Indianapolis's Black cultural epicenter in the 1920s, Indiana Avenue. David says his book is about highlighting strengths, and he's hoping history can be a healer.
I'm hoping that my book will encourage the generation X's and Z's to know that they come from a people who were hardworking, who were honorable, and who helped and loved one another. And I want them to return to the time period where we were able to love one another and not fight one another. So if I could do that, I think that my humble effort would have been fantastic.
And David's book also celebrates Black Hoosier war heroes, politicians, stellar athletes. Indiana University Press published David's book.
That's a really great story. I feel like I learned a lot just in those couple minutes. So what is next for David?
So he is actually hard at work right now. He's focusing on his next project, which will zero in on the contributions of influential African-American women at the turn of the century. So he expects to release that work next year.
Good for him.
And one of the aspects of this book that I absolutely love is that it has this positive, upbeat undercurrent. Because there are a lot of books that I've read over the years, which I won't name because I'm not recommending those books, that when they're talking about Black history is so negative. Were there things that happen that are not positive? Yes. But there's a way to talk about it where you also lift up the good. And there, I will say that there was one interesting thing I learned in this book that I had like no knowledge about. There was a colonization movement. So I literally go back to the African movement that happened in Indianapolis, where they got some Black Hoosiers to actually move to Liberia. And so in the book, he actually has a page where you get to see the names of the people who actually left and to go to Liberia. And so I'm reading this book right now with a couple other people. And that led to us saying we need to know more information. So we all went to go do our own research. And so there are videos that we were able to find online about people who live in Liberia, who ended up in Liberia due to this colonization movement, and how that shaped Liberia, and how some of those people have Hoosier ties back to Indiana. So it was just like a really cool book. And English teacher tip: when I read books, I talk to myself in the books, like I ask questions. So that's why I got this thing tabbed here. So on this particular one, I wrote another literary society, because I want to learn more about this Association of Western Writers that was mentioned in this book. And there's a reason I actually picked out this one, because we're going to talk about literary societies before this presentation is over, because I want you all, if you leave this presentation with nothing else, I want you to shift into the mindset of being a literary, and I'm going to tell you what that is. So if you do choose to read books as a way to learn more about Black history throughout the year, write notes to yourself, highlight things that you want to go learn more about. And then if you know other people, read with other people. Also, it helps with accountability, because sometimes we start reading and we don't have the staying power. So reading with other people help you stay on a track. And I just talked about this, but one of the things you can do is read with other people. So I do have a book club, and that's one of the books we are currently reading. And actually, David is coming to our book club tomorrow, because we are wrapping up his book this week. So I'm super, super excited about that. But other ways that you can engage in Black history are to go to different resources. So one resource I really like to recommend, even though it's not focused solely on Black history, is the Multicultural Children's Book Day. Online, it goes by the hashtag Read Your World. And that hashtag essentially means that kids, adults, we should be reading books that represents what's in the world. And the creator of that, Mia Wen-jin, she does a great job of putting out these lists of resources for different things. So like she has a list of books from Appalachian, books about Black hair, you name it, she has a list for that. And so that has helped me as a person when I'm like, okay, I want to learn about something new, and I can just go click one of these lists. And even though it says Multicultural Children's Book Day, all the books are not picture books. So some of the books are like full chapter books as well. Another resource that I like is Helping Kids Rise. Helping Kids Rise has a large focus on Black children or children of color. They use that a lot. Here locally, Black Rural Schooler Mobile Bookstore. I absolutely love Natalie Pipkin, who is the woman behind that bookmobile. I've been on that bookmobile one too many times, so I do know where I got some of my books from, because I got them for her. But she does a great job of curating book lists, and I never talk to her without having a recommendation for a book that I need to read. So I always have like a standing open order. If you're a person that is like reading books, it takes me some time, and transparently, I am a slow reader. So if I actually have to read, I read slow. I've always been a slow reader, and I tell kids that as well. So I like to listen to books as I follow along. And also, if you get a good audio book, sometimes I put a little music underneath there, and it's very soothing. But if you're like, that's still not for me, videos are a great way to keep up with history. One of the videos series that I've loved is Crash Course Black American History. They take concepts and he puts them into like 10 minutes. So I watched a video back in October. It was about the two different philosophies of Booker T. Washington versus W.E.B. Du Bois. Like, what were their two big philosophies and how they interacted. And I knew somewhat about both of those philosophies, but understanding those philosophies helps you understand some of the viewpoints people may have in the Black community, because I argue that many of those viewpoints can be traced all the way back to Booker T. Washington, which is the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, versus W.E.B. Du Bois, who talked a lot about, like, you know, having these systems and structures into place, and that we should work hard, but they're also something that we deserve to have as well. Additionally, and this one may sound very simple, but it's the one that I find when I have conversation with people that they overlook, is attending Black culture-centered events. If you want to learn about a culture, go to the events. There's the Black Business Bazaar happens once a year here annually. You can go to that. Black Expo happens. So one of my sons, he is an artist. He's actually doing a project right now for an organization where he's designing a t-shirt for them. But I took him to the Black Expo to go to the art exhibits so he could learn about art, because that's the thing that he's into. So when I send him off and he's working with other youth workers and they're teaching him different art things, I expect those youth art workers to have some knowledge of some of the Black artists that my son may have seen at this exhibit that I took him to, because I want him to see the whole range of art. So going to places where, and this is applicable to any culture. So maybe you're like, Shantae, I'm gonna learn about Black culture, but maybe I want to learn something about my own culture. Going to events like that. So I took German in high school and college. So like I low-key participate in some German groups around here, because I just want to stay knowledgeable about that, because I have one friend that speaks German, but I don't have enough people that I can keep it up as well. Duolingo helps, but I do that because that's the way I can learn about things. And then follow reputable sources online. And I want to take a moment here. You want to follow people where it is clear that they source their information from reading an encyclopedia, reading an article, because a lot of times there's stuff that's shared online where someone's like, Black History Fact today, and they just have a quick caption online. You don't know where they got it from. All of the videos that I have done, you can see my sources on the screen, or if you're looking at my slide deck, I have linked in actual sources, and I do that intentionally because there's so much misinformation online, and you want to make sure that if you're learning something, you're not now adding misinformation to your knowledge. So I want you all to be literaries. So a literary is essentially a person who engages in learning and then engages with other people and share that learning, and they use that to go out and do whatever the work that they are going to do. If you want to learn a little bit more about literary societies, I strongly suggest you check out this book, Cultivating Genius. I will be transparent and say it's more geared towards people who are teachers. However, what I like about this book is that they talk about African American literary societies. And those societies were societies where Black people got together, they learned stuff, and then they wrote essays, and they would write essays back and forth to each other, or they would share a viewpoint, listen to somebody else's viewpoint. They may give speeches. And so it was a place to learn knowledge. And that's why I really promote book clubs, because the public library, they have book clubs. I don't live in Speedway, Indiana, but I follow the book clubs that happen at the Speedway Library, and they are very great about having book clubs. It's just cool to be somewhere where you have read something and you can talk to somebody about it, because if you didn't have a great English education experience in the classroom and reading a book was just like this horrible thing, or you had to read and write an essay, you may not have gotten the joy of just reading and interacting and then sharing and connecting. So when I was helping an organization with implementing Black history into their curriculum, the most powerful thing that happened after they learned some knowledge was just the youth workers singing around and talking about what they learned, and then how can we actually incorporate this? Maybe we should do a project, or maybe we should add this to this event that we are doing, or maybe we should take our students to this organization and participate. So there is the learning, being the literary, and then there's also the engaging back and forth with other people to sharpen those ideas. And then there's like the implementation and planning of it. And also, don't feel like everything has to happen overnight. Maybe you do one thing, and that probably sounds very small, but I tell people it's better to do one thing well than to try to throw in a whole bunch of initiatives, and then it's just chaotic, and it's like, what were they trying to do? It is unclear to me. So it's really super important to just hone in on that. And then, so now maybe year one, you got this initiative, you keep that one going. And then year two, you add a second one, and you keep going that way. You'll have numerous initiatives. And then the other aspect I tell people is to think about like intersectional cross points. So if you're doing Black history, do you have a balance between females that you are covering and connecting to versus males that you may be covering and connecting to? also, and when I tell people, when people talk about like diversity, equity, inclusion, and we talk about diversity, a lot of times we hear in our brain racial diversity, but I don't think that way. Race is just one aspect of diversity. You also have gender. One that gets overlooked is age. Do you have a whole host of people? So a lot of times what gets left out of Black history are like Black kids who are literally doing work right now. So one Black activist that I follow, that's a kid, is Mari Copany. She is known as Little Miss Flint, but she is a clean water activist. She has Water Wednesday. So today is a Water Wednesday. Every Wednesday is a Water Wednesday, where she is fundraising money to not only get bottles of water to people. That's like the bottom floor. If you ever hear her speak, she talks about that's not enough. We actually need to solve the problem. So she has her own filter that she uses money that she raises to create these filters and then send it. And many of the students that you'll work with, if their school subscribes to Scholastic, they probably have read about her, because I know she was featured in Scholastic magazine, I believe last school year, because I saw it for kids that I work with in our state. And then there is Belen. I can't think of her last name, but she has this sweet, lovely afro. She is a crown activist, and you're probably saying like, what in the what? But I loved her, and she has a book that's called More Than a Peach. Is a children's picture book, but it was about, and this all started about the fact that she was like coloring, and there wasn't a crown for her skin color. And so that turned into her creating her own crowns where they had multiple shades. Side note, Crayola now has crowns that have colors of the world, but I argue that happened due to this kid doing the work. So when you are working with youth, think about other youth that you could actually highlight and connect them to, because we intellectually know this, but a lot of times kids respond better to other kids and what other kids are doing out there in the world. So this is a video. I don't have time to show this whole video here, but you'll have this this link here. But this gives you a deep dive about literary societies in America. A lot of them happen in like the Midwest, Philadelphia, New York area. And there were definitely some here in Indiana. And one that was here in Indiana was the Union Literary Institute, which is also featured in the book African Americans in Indianapolis. But what's interesting about this literary institute, this was a multiracial board that came together. So it was Black people and white people that came together to create this literary institute where kids could go and exchange and use knowledge. So at one point in time, there was a white teacher, there was a Black teacher, and kids are learning together, and they were supporting kids going to college. It was this whole thing. And so I always tell people, if you read something nationally, because we've talked about the juxtaposition between national history and local history, you will probably be able to find some local history to something that you found nationally. So I found this really cool. And when you get this slide deck, this actually takes you to the Indiana Historical Bureau, who's done a really huge, long, lengthy work about this Union Literary Institute. So one of my favorite people on earth is LeVar Burton. I pray for his safety every single day because I have yet to meet this man, but that's one of my life personal goals. He stays on the prayer list to stay healthy and whole so I can meet him. But one of the things that he says that I love, if you're a reader for life, then you're a learner for life. And if you're a learner for life, you are the definition of what I consider to be a dangerous individual, which is someone who doesn't have to take anybody else's word for it. I always want people to leave my presentations with a thing that they're going to go do. So in the chat, I want you to put one thing that you can commit to doing next week to engage in Black history so that you're learning it with the next step of connecting it back to the work you're doing and figuring out with the other people how you're going to incorporate it in your organization. And also, I will take questions at this time as well.
So we do have a few minutes. And so if there are questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will get to them. But I will just kick us off by asking, what are some really easy, simple, quick ways, maybe for folks who aren't teachers but see kids for 15, 20 minutes, to include Black history throughout the year?
That's a great question, because sometimes we don't have kids in front of us for a long time, and this sounds really basic, but having there are resources where you can get a book where it features different people in history, and then you share something about that person that ties to the work that you're doing. So if you're doing something around with students and mental health or taking care of themselves, maybe you feature a doctor and share that with kids so they can understand that there's people that look like them that's doing that same work as well. And then you can also ask kids, what do they want to learn more about? And then find people in history that are doing that thing. And also people that are present day, because it doesn't always have to be people in the past.
Yeah, that's great. Who is someone in Black history that you've learned about recently that you would like to highlight for everyone?
Okay, so I told you guys I was doing the Hoosier Educator series. It's the Cable family. So the mom is Mary Ellen Cable. The husband is George Washington Cable. And side note, a lot of people in history had George Washington as their first and middle name after the first president, Black and white people, which makes it very challenging when you're researching somebody and everybody's first name was George and middle name was Washington. And then they had their son, Dr. Theodore Cable. All of these people were educators. Mary Cable had a school named after her, School 4, that was open all the way through 2006. And she was a teacher and an activist, and she grew a garden. Then her husband became this famous orator and speaker. And then their son ended up going to Harvard University. And this man became a dentist that opened his own practice in the Walker Building. He was a pilot and owned his own plane. He was married 5 different times, which I was like, how do you have time to do this with all the other things that you are doing? He had a free clinic. He started an award. So I found this whole family quite interesting. And all the teachers I've learned about so far in my series, all of them did more than just teach. So they all did teaching and some type of giving back to the community, whether that was, one lady was a teacher and went to medical school, Beulah Porter. She went to medical school and opened, she was the first Black woman to open a medical practice in Indianapolis. And so she was teaching and then sending home information to the parents about how to have good health and hygiene for your kids. And she was a legit medical doctor as well. So I found I could talk about, you asked me like a question that I could talk about forever, but yes, so those are the most interesting people I've learned about recently.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we appreciate your passion. We do have a few minutes, Shante, so if there's anything else you'd like to leave them with, now would be the time to do that. We didn't get any questions in there, but there was some good discussion in the chat, including promotion of some local Black History Month events. Let me pull up the one. May, 1 second. Oh man, there's been a lot of chat recently.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. Oh wait. Sorry, I got it. Freetown Village is hosting a monthly conversations in African American history with local historians, researchers, and educators. And so that'll be on February 15th. There's a link in the chat for that. So Miriam posted that. So Shante, sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you're fine. Just when you said that, it popped into my mind. Follow Indiana Landmarks. They are doing a whole host of series this month. And I know they just did one this week. And they're going to release the Zoom, I believe, on their YouTube. I think that's what they said. But it was about Black publications that existed, in addition to the Indianapolis Recorder, and how that is how we've been able to track some of the Black history in our state and how you can go into it. So the Indiana Historical Society has taken a lot of these articles and digitized them. So you can go search somebody's name and look them up. So that's part of how I found out a lot of my Black history is I dove into the archives, but a lot of people feel like they have to go to the library, get like the card collection and go through the catalog. A lot of that stuff is now being digitized, and it's slow work. But when I put in Mary Ellen Cable, I mean, I got back about 150 different articles where her name was mentioned about all the work that she did in our city and in our state as well. But if you're interested in the educator series I'm doing, I release a video a day on my YouTube channel, and all that information is listed below. And then I'm going to compile that into a document and put it on my website on blazingbrilliance.com, and that will be free public facing information for everyone. That's my give back. I always try to give back something during Black History Month that people can use, because there's a lot of work to comb through that information. And then the other thing, there's probably another book I wanted to recommend. Oh, I know. This book is written by one of my friends, Dr. Erica Buchanan Rivera. It's Identity Affirming Classrooms. And I know everyone on here isn't a teacher, but this talks about how you can implement some of like any type of Black history or diverse things in a way that's like respectful and inclusive to all people. And she gives really great tips in this book. So I always like to recommend that book as well. And I don't know if any questions came into the chat while I was speaking, Josh.
No questions, but there's been a ton of comments, a lot of them committing to learning more about some of the historical Black figures that you posted. Folks are excited to learn more about Black women, girls in the outdoors. And then the last one that came through that I'll go ahead and then I'll go ahead and finish up the webinar. I don't know if folks know, but MLK Jr.'s nephew, Derek King, lives here in Indianapolis and is a professor at Martin University. On Sunday, he's going to do a panel discussion at Martin University that's open to the public. So I think one lesson from this is, if you are committed to teaching Black history throughout the year, which everyone could be, there are plenty of resources for you to access to be able to do that, whether it's short interactions with youth or full-on lessons. So Shantae, thank you so much for the webinar today. I'm going to go ahead and share over you so that I can wrap up here.
Oh, Jess, can I add one more research really quickly?
Sure.
A Black forager. Her name is Alexis Nicole, I believe, Nelson. And I just watched a video from her today, and she shared about a book that George Washington Carver released in like 1942. But she's all about like foraging, finding things in your environment, and then she's been tying it back to Black history this month. So if you're into like girls, like getting out there, check her out, because I absolutely love her videos and she's so adorable. So okay, that's it.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so as a reminder, a copy of the PowerPoint will be emailed out to you at the end. The best way to keep in touch with us, we have a ton of professional development opportunities, is to sign up for our weekly newsletter. You can do that at IYI.org/newsletters. For our upcoming webinar series, on February 28th, we will host Indiana Youth Institute's 2024 State of the Child. This is a little bit different of a webinar. We are going to present our data for this year's Kids Count data book that we put out every year. So that should be really interesting and a little bit more data focused. So please consider signing up and attending for that. And so as we conclude, I want to thank everyone that joined us today. We know that your time is valuable, especially during the work week. We really appreciate your impact and value your voice and the choice you made to be with us. Later today, you will receive an email. It'll have a link to complete an evaluation of the webinar. Please, please, please take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about the presentation. And once you do fill out the evaluation, you'll click finish and it'll redirect you to your certificate of completion. We know that some of you need that for work. So that concludes our presentation. So on behalf of IYI, Educator Barnes, and Indiana's youth, thank you again for showing up today and every day for Indiana youth.